Hi there, I'm Christine Van Gyn, and this is the Freedom Update, the bi-weekly video podcast from the Canadian Constitution Foundation, where we talk about our ongoing cases, update you on interesting constitutional developments from across Canada, and let you know about our upcoming events. Thanks for tuning in, and let's talk about freedom. So I have an amazing update from an important case we've been working on in British Columbia. The BC government was trying to shut down some vital medical clinics that have been helping patients in BC for more than 2 decades. Yeah, that's right. The government was trying to shut down healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. Why on earth would they do that? To prove an ideological point. These are independent, non-government, yeah, that's right, private healthcare clinics. They've been helping patients in British Columbia for more than 20 years, and the government wanted to shut them down at a time when the surgical backlog is getting even worse because of COVID-19. They wanted to do this to prove a point about Canada's commitment to Medicare, which has failed to provide timely health care to countless patients and left so many people suffering on wait lists. We asked the BC Court of Appeal to prevent the government from shutting down these desperately needed clinics. And the great news is, we won. This week, the BC Court of Appeal released a decision that said the clinics can stay open to treat patients who have waited beyond the medically acceptable wait times for surgery in government hospitals. This victory is a really big deal because we faced an uphill battle. We've been in court fighting for healthcare choice in a larger constitutional challenge of the laws that restrict the right of patients to access non-government healthcare. Unfortunately, a few months ago we lost that case at the trial level, but this was just the first step, and the case will inevitably go all the way to the Supreme Court. But while those appeals happen, it's crucial that patients are still able to access the healthcare they need at these clinics. Now, it's very unusual for a court to grant an injunction to tell the government they can't enforce a law in the face of a court finding that the law is valid and constitutional, which is what we had. But we got the injunction. The harm to those patients would be so irreparable, and the case is so important and meritorious that the Court of Appeal granted us the injunction. The appeal in the larger constitutional case is being heard in June, and we'll be sure to keep you updated through this video update and through our mailing list, which you can subscribe to at www.theccf.ca. There's some interesting constitutional developments from across Canada, and this week we're going to be checking in Manitoba and Ontario to talk about, that's right, you guessed it, lockdowns. Lockdowns are now being challenged in both of these provinces. First, there was a challenge in Manitoba. The province had banned drive-in religious services as part of their new lockdown. Now, this just doesn't make any sense. It's not possible to get COVID while you're sitting alone in your car with the windows shut listening to the radio. But that didn't stop Premier Brian Pallister from banning it. Well, Springs Church in Winnipeg challenged the law. They brought an application challenging the regulation and asked for an emergency injunction. Now, unfortunately, the court decided to defer to the government and wouldn't grant the injunction that would have allowed the church to continue running their service. So, the church engaged in some civil disobedience. This last Sunday, they continued to offer drive-in services, which attracted hundreds of cars. The RCMP blocked the entrance to the church parking lot and fined the church $5,000. It gave another person a ticket of nearly $1,300. But a few days later, the government caved. On Tuesday, December 8th, just 2 days after imposing those fines, the government of Manitoba announced that drive-in worship would be allowed to happen. Looks like the civil disobedience may have worked in this case. Another church in Ontario is also challenging the lockdown measures. Toronto International Celebration Church has asked for an emergency injunction similar to the one that was sought by the Winnipeg Church. The Toronto Church is huge. It has capacity for over 1,000 parishioners. But the lockdown in Toronto means that churches are restricted to indoor services of only 10 people. Now, this just doesn't make sense for a church of this size. During the summer, this Toronto church had been operating at about 30% capacity, which for them was about 300 parishioners. Now, this church believes that COVID is a real public health threat, and they've taken extensive safety measures to protect their parishioners. These include individually portioned communion wines in sealed packets, blocking off aisles and seats to ensure distance between parishioners. They've placed floor markers and directions for spacing during entry and exit of the church. And while they were permitted to open, they left their doors open so that people wouldn't touch hard surfaces and there would be good ventilation, and they required parishioners to register in advance for the available 300 spaces. Now, despite the best efforts of the church leadership, the government has arbitrarily limited religious gatherings to just 10. This impairs the fundamental religious freedom of parishioners, and it's arbitrary because the limit of 10 people doesn't take into account the very large size of this particular church. It's also unequal treatment because many other facilities don't have a 10-person gathering limit. For instance, big box stores or hardware stores. Why is there this arbitrary restriction on religious gatherings? The injunction's being heard on December 18th on an urgent basis, and we're going to have a lot more to say about this very, very soon. You can learn more about what we may be involved in by signing up at theccf.ca, and we'll be sending an update in the next few days. Churches aren't the only ones challenging lockdowns. An appliance store in Ontario and the Hudson's Bay have both filed challenges of the lockdowns. The appliance store in Ontario sought an interim relief and an injunction so that they could remain open. They said that over the weekend of being closed, they were subject to losing $500,000 in revenue during their busiest time of the year. While this appliance store was not granted their interim relief, the judge noted that there is an inherent unfairness that big box stores are allowed to remain open while small retailers are forced to shut. The judge stated that the government's going to need to provide a rationale as to why. Now, the Bay has asked for a judicial review of the lockdown rules that have forced them to shut. Although I'll note that the Bay kept their flagship downtown Toronto store open for the first few days of Ontario's lockdown, relying on the fact that they sell some fancy groceries in the basement. Hey, not that I'm holding it against them. I think that these rules make no sense, so why not work them to your advantage? So in these court documents that the Bay has filed, they argue that the province's health data shows shoppers aren't contributing to the spread of COVID-19 in a significant way. And it's true, I went through the same data myself, and it looked like only about 80 cases had been spread through retail stores. And the Toronto Sun reported that their analysis concluded that 0.1% of Ontario cases could be connected to retail stores. In light of all of that, it really does make little sense to shut down retail stores. We'll be monitoring both of these cases and we'll keep you updated about the results. For the holidays, we won't be having any significant events, but there's still a really important way that you can get involved in our work. On December 1st, we launched a campaign called No Arbitrary Lockdowns. We're fighting back against lockdowns that have become arbitrary and random, and we've been putting together the names and stories of people who have been hurt by the government's sledgehammer restrictions on our fundamental rights. You can add your name and tell your story by visiting www.theccf.ca/no-arbitrary-lockdowns. We're also looking for plaintiffs who are interested in challenging these lockdowns. We're looking in particular for plaintiffs who are safety-conscious individuals and businesses who believe that COVID-19 is a real threat and have taken safety precautions, but despite their best efforts are being hurt by these arbitrary government actions. We've already heard from hundreds of you, and we'll have news to share in our next few days about the next steps. That's all for this update. Thanks for tuning in, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.